state. This marks the 4th time the department has done a long-term plan like this. Our current plan ran from 2016 to 2025, so it's about to expire. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the process that the department's gone through to date. So in about December of 2023, our different biological staff, our project leaders, started to compile data for the different species, so for deer, bear, moose, and turkey. Population trends, changes in habitat, if there was any scientific research projects that had been conducted in the 10 years since the previous plan, and they started compiling all that information from the last 10 years plan, and they started working on species assessments. So these species assessments are pretty comprehensive documents on the management history for these different game species in the state. There's a lot of really good information in there. We update these every time we go through the planning process. And the intent there was to get all this information up on our website so the public could view that prior to the draft plan coming out, to kind of see where these populations are, how management has changed over the years. Most of those got up on our website around June of 2024 for the public to review prior to this plan. We presented information on the process to our commission at their February 2024 meeting to let them know that the more formal part of the process was going to kick off and to give them a general timeline of what to expect for this planning process. Around the same time, we developed our big game plan on the webpage. We put information on there so that the public could kind of stay updated and go back for updates as things happen. There was general timeline information on there. In April of 2024, we started working internally on our public opinion survey, and we ended up working with the UNH Survey Center. That survey was made available to the public in December of 2024, and Andy Timmons, who's our game project leader, our game program supervisor, will go over a little bit more detail about the survey specifically. But working through the survey center, the survey was sent out to a selection of the general population, and then also we were able to get email information from our licensing database and also send the survey out to hunters. We got results back from UNH from that survey. Those were analyzed, and the results were posted on our website in March of this year. Throughout this period, our project leaders were working on draft goals and strategies for their respective species. Following getting the results of the survey, they looked at those draft plans and made adjustments based on the survey. And then we developed the draft plan, which was posted on our website last month for the public to review. And that kind of brings us to tonight. So tonight is the first of our public input sessions. This is specific to our game management plan. So the department has a lot of things going on right now. I noticed some faces in the crowd that were here last week for our rulemaking hearings. So just for clarification, that's not what these meetings are. The game plan goes over kind of broad goals and objectives, population level objectives, and broad objectives that kind of help guide management. The nuts and bolts of bag limits, number of either sex days, allowable weapon types, those are all things that we tweak when we go through season setting to reach those objectives. So these are the overarching goals that guide those different decisions over the next 10 years. The other thing that the department has going on is the revision of our 10-year state wildlife action plan. There's been surveys sent out about that as well, but this is very specific to big game plan that covers management of these species for the next 10 years. We're going to have 4 of these input sessions. Tonight's the first. We have another one tomorrow night in Keene at the Keene High School. We'll have another one April 16th at the Tin Mountain Conservation Center in Albany, New Hampshire. And then one on April 17th, which will be at our Region 1 office, Fish and Game office in Lancaster. We'll also accept written comments through April 25th. Those can either be mailed to headquarters here, or they can be emailed to comments@wildlife.nh.gov. Following the close of the comment period, Our project leaders and our game team will review all the input we've gotten to date, and if we feel we can accommodate anything biologically, we will incorporate those comments into our plan. We hope to have a final plan that we can present to our executive director and the commission at their June meeting, and hopes that this plan will be adopted, and then that will guide management of these species over the next 10 years. So that's kind of what the process is, where we've been, where we have left to go. We have a lot of department staff here, so I'll have them introduce themselves, and I'll start with our commission.
AJ Guerrero, Stratford County Commissioner. Chris Larson, Merrimack County.
Jim Patel, I'm the Seacoast Commissioner.
John Cavaney, Cheshire County Commissioner.
Bruce Temple, Sullivan County.
Greg Rain, Hillsborough County, and Chairman of the Commission.
Eric Stoll, Coas County. Dave Poole, Grafton County. Patrick McGonigal, Delaware County.
We have one of our law enforcement officers here,
Griffin McEwen for the 56 Patrol, Southwest Corner, 55.
and then we have a number of our biological staff. We'll start with you, Andy.
Andy Timmons, Game Program Supervisor.
Go to you, Henry.
Henry Jones, Moose Project Leader.
Dan Bailey, Bear Project Leader.
Jessica Carloni, Waterfowl Project Leader.
Becca Buda, Deer Project Leader.
Dan Ellingwood, Turkey Project Leader.
So we have a presentation. We're going to go through the plan and give you some information on that. And then when that's over, we'll open it up for public comment. And of course, our staff will be taking notes on comments. The meeting is being recorded as well in multiple places. And our commission's here to listen to the input as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy to kind of kick off the presentation.
Well, evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. As Dan mentioned, we're embarking on, our current plan is soon to expire, so we need to have a new long-term management plan in place for January 1 of 2026, and we're on good track. If you've had a chance to review the plan at all, you'll notice that it's set up in chapters. There's 6 chapters total, and I'm going to talk briefly about chapters 1 and chapter 2. These chapters, particularly chapter 2, is pretty lengthy, so I'm going to kind of try to paraphrase, recognizing that this presentation is fairly lengthy. We want to give you folks opportunity to speak. But I'll just start out. Chapter 1 is really an overview introduction to the plan, and a couple key points that I want to hit on is that the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department conserves and manages wildlife resources for the citizens of New Hampshire. And that's established, one, both in various state statutes, give us the authority to do what we do as a management agency. But the concept is also rooted in the principles of what's known as the North American model of wildlife conservation, which states that wildlife is a public trust. Wildlife is not owned by anybody, it's shared by the entire citizenry of the state. And the tenet of this model, the key tenet, is that a government agency such as New Hampshire Fish and Game manages those wildlife resources for the benefit of New Hampshire citizenry. So it's not managed just for those interested in hunting, it's also managed for those that have interest in wildlife for other non-consumptive reasons. Dan mentioned this is actually our 4th plan since 1997. The first plan ran for 8 or 9 years, and then we got on a 10-year interval, so we're on that 10-year interval. And because this is our 4th plan, it really speaks to the emphasis that the agency puts into long-term planning. We are strong believers in long-term planning because it leads towards, steady progress towards goals that are hopefully agreed upon by the commission of the department and members of the public that are weighing in. In the lack of a long-term plan, you're constantly changing direction. It becomes inefficient, a lot of false starts. So we really believe in long-term management. And you can't cause wildlife populations to change either towards a goal or whatever whether you're decreasing or increasing. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes years. So, it really fits in well to the long-term approach. So, I mentioned that, the principles of the North American model wildlife conservation. We're managing these wildlife resources in the state for all the New Hampshire public. So for that reason, we needed to hear from all the New Hampshire public when we were starting out the process. And what we did is we contracted with the University of New Hampshire to do a residents' opinion survey. So that included both residents that held hunting licenses. It also included randomly selected members of the general public that may hold hunting licenses. We don't know. They weren't selected for that reason. They were representative of the general New Hampshire population. So I'll get to the survey in a minute, but as Dan also pointed out, we are going to take public input, and we're going to work public input into the plan when we can do so biologically. A good plan is based on broad public input, but as well as strong biological data. So the objective of this plan was to measure public's opinion. Do they want more or less or the same number of deer, more or less or the same number of turkeys? There were a lot of questions asked in this survey, but the real key questions that we were interested in were people's opinions on population levels. And the project leaders will get into some of the results in their specific sections. But first, as far as the general population, UNH used what's called the Granite State Panel. It's essentially a panel that they maintain of contact information for residents of New Hampshire. These are people that have agreed to take surveys in the past, and they maintain that contact list so that they can send surveys out to those people. So a little over 7,000 people from the general population were invited to participate. We received a little over 2,000 completed surveys from the general population for a response rate of 24%, which is pretty darn good. Additionally, to reach people in the more northern part of the state where internet service is often more spotty and people may not be as in tune to checking email all the time, it's referred to as oversampling. In the northern part of the state, they also sent out 35,000 text messages to randomly selected members of the public and received 577 usable surveys from that sample. So collectively, the general population was 2,900 completed received surveys. And for the license holders, we looked at the database, people who had indicated that they're willing to allow the department to contact them and it provided contact information. We went back 5 years. Anybody who held a hunting license in the last 5 years was considered a candidate. So we invited a little over 22,000 license holders to participate, and we received 2,863 completed surveys. So a lower response rate, but collectively, very close similarity between the number of individuals who participated representing the general population and the number that participated representing license holders. And it's important to note that the previous 10-year plans that we did, we were doing telephone surveys. We weren't doing it. We were contracting with a group who did it on our behalf. And back then, we were looking at a total sample size of about 600. But technology has changed. The ability to do online surveys has really increased overall sample size. So rather than 600 individuals, we're basing this plan on almost 6,000 individuals. So a good thing there. So now I'm going to jump to chapter 2, and what we want to do in this plan is there's some common management issues that are relevant to all big game species. In the past plan, we kind of addressed those in each section under each species. In this plan, we decided to be more efficient to try to kind of consolidate those and address them in their own chapter. And that's what I'm going to just kind of briefly go through here. So there's 4 goals in this chapter. The first goal is to promote the understanding and appreciation of big game species in New Hampshire and build support for their conservation and management. And under this goal, there's 7 strategies in the plan that relate to measuring how well people understand the issues that relate to these species and how well they support our current management programs. Also, we'll describe ways that we will inform and engage the public about big game species in New Hampshire. Okay, I'm sorry. Goal 2, that's the one now. So, goal 2 is to provide recreational opportunities for big game species. So this includes, there's 3 strategies in the plan related to this. So this includes providing opportunities for both the consumptive as well as the non-consumptive use of these species. So activities such as wildlife watching, wildlife photography, but also activities like hunting. Goal 3 is somewhat related. It's to promote hunting of big game species as both a management tool, but also a recreational opportunity. So there's 6 strategies under this goal, and I'm gonna just kind of summarize these quickly. First is to maintain hunting framework that are necessary in order to meet the goals and objectives that are stated in this plan. Ensure that the hunting season structure matches the desired management approach and also provides equitable opportunity to different hunting groups. Incorporate both species biology as well as the ecology of species into hunter-ed programs. This is happening as we speak. Turkey biologists will be assisting in a turkey hunting seminar this weekend, I believe. So this is already starting to happen. We're looking to bolster that. Promote game meat donation programs and to promote the use of non-lead ammunition for big game hunting. And the final goal is to promote habitat protection, conservation, and sustainable forest management for the benefit of big game species. It's all about habitat. You know, these species need available and an adequate amount of habitat in order to meet their life needs. So ultimately, our ability to meet these objectives in the plan are really going to depend on what habitat does in the state. But the strategies under this goal include maintaining adequate habitat in order to meet population goals and objectives, identifying, mapping, and tracking what we consider critical habitats. Critical habitats would be functioning softwood cover that provide deer wintering areas for deer. They would be critical stands of hard mass such as beech and oak for bears and other species. So, you know, within inside, you know, there's habitat, and then inside that there's what's considered critical habitat. So putting some effort on making sure we know where these spots occur in the state and protecting them. Provide education, technical expertise, and financial resources, and I have to add as available, in order to influence habitat conservation and management. Collaborate with local, state, federal, as well as private conservation groups in their mission to support and improve wildlife habitat. And to provide outreach on climate change. And the last one is explore options to incentivize habitat conservation. So that covers the first 2 chapters. Now the remaining chapters are gonna be species specific. They're gonna get into more detail on the individual species, and I'm gonna hand it over to Becky.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on to our goals for our white-tailed deer. So one of the questions we asked in that survey that Andy mentioned was, how would you rate the deer management program performance in your county? So on the left-hand side, we have our public survey, and on the right-hand side, we have our license holders. So what we learned from the public is that most of them are not very familiar with the management program. So 57% answered that they don't know. But those that did have an opinion, most of them were positive. 33% answered very good or good, with only 2% saying poor or very poor. And we had a similar pattern among the license holders, except that, as you would imagine, our license holders are a little more knowledgeable about our deer program. And so the majority of them felt that the deer program performed very good or good, 65%, with only 6% saying poor or very poor. So one of the other questions we asked was, what do you think do you think the deer population should be larger, smaller, or about as it is right now? And so among the public, the most common answer was about right as it is right now, so 46%. 22% felt it should be larger, and 8% felt it should be smaller.
Shouldn't it be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3?
So I'll just ask that we keep comments and questions to the end, just so, because it's a long presentation, just so we can get through.
Yeah, no problem.
No worries.
And across the state, these patterns were pretty similar, with the exception that in Coos County, residents were more likely to say that they wanted more deer. Obviously, it's our most northern county, generally has lower deer density, so that's not particularly surprising. And then among license holders, we had, again, sort of a similar pattern, except fewer people mentioned, said that they didn't know. The majority of respondents said that they wanted the deer population to stay about as it is right now, while 40% said that it should be larger or somewhat larger, with only 5% saying smaller. And again, the patterns were pretty similar across the state, except that in Coos County, again, license holders were more likely to say they wanted more deer, and then down in the southeastern part of the state, Rockingham and Stratford County were less likely to say that they wanted more deer. So I'm going to move on to our goals now. So our first goal is to manage white-tailed deer populations using the best available science while balancing social, economic, and ecological factors. And so, as you guys probably are familiar, we have 20 deer management units in the state. Today, I'm only going to focus on the ones in the southern part of the state, because just in the interest of time. If anybody has units that they want to see, I'm happy to show that. I have all the slides, I've just hidden some of them so that we can focus on the area and sort of the southern third of the state. So if you were here for a rulemaking session, this graph probably looks a little bit familiar. We're going to start in Unit H1. And so the blue line here represents our adult buck kill. That's what we use as our index to the population. And we use the 2-year average because it smooths out some of the variation that we see from year to year that can be caused by changes in hunting conditions, like weather conditions, mass production. And then if you look at that solid red line, that's our objective. So that's what we're doing here today in our game management plan, is setting those objectives. So our 2016 to 2025 objective was 460, which is 1.2 bucks per square mile. We're not proposing to change this objective today, and you'll see that's the theme in almost all of the units. So currently, you can see that our population in H1, that adult buck kill, is above objective. So we're currently managing this population to decrease it to that objective. And then those, didn't mention before, but those dashed lines on either side, the red dashed lines on either side of the objective, are just 12.5% sideboard. So within that buffer zone, we sort of consider a population to be at objective. Okay, Unit H2. In 2016 through 2025, that game management plan, we set the objective at 675. And we're actually proposing to decrease this objective a little bit down to about 600. There's a few reasons for that. So you can see, if you look at that black line, that would be where the new objective would be. And you can see it's kind of from about at the level where this population was from the early 1990s through about the early 2010s. So in this management unit, we have started to see some signs of browse impacts on vegetation. I saw it during some field visits. I've spoken to some foresters on the ground there. And we also have a population model that's currently showing that, estimating that this deer population in H1 is 26 deer per square mile, which is really at a higher level than you want to see if you want to avoid impacts to your forest regeneration. And so we are proposing to lower that objective slightly. And so, as you can see, our adult buckkill is currently well above that, what that objective would be. So our management action would be to decrease the population in this unit. Unit I-1, objective in the previous management plan was 215 bucks or 0.67 per square mile. We're not proposing to change the objective. We're currently above objective, and so we're managing this population to decrease it to that objective. Unit I-2, again, we're not proposing any changes to the objective. It's currently 260 bucks or 0.74 bucks per square mile. And it's at objective within that buffer, so we're just managing to stabilize this population. J2, the objective is 940, not proposing any changes to that. It's just, our current population is just a little bit above that, so we're managing to decrease it slightly. Unit K is similar situation. Our objective is 675. We're not proposing to change that in this plan, and so we would be managing to decrease that population slightly as well. Unit L, the objective is 525. We're not proposing to change that either. We're currently well above objective in this unit, so we are managing to decrease that population substantially with all the antlerless permits that we issue in this region, as well as an abundance of either sex days. In Unit M, the objective in the previous plan was 535. We're not planning to change that either. And so we are managing to decrease that population as well by about 45%. And so you might be wondering, why not just increase our deer objectives? So if you look at our historical data, which dates back to 1922, our adult buckkill in a lot of our units is higher than it ever has been. A lot of states to our south and to our west, like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, they have seen a lot of negative impacts on habitat from overabundant deer. And so it's not something that we've seen at a widespread scale in New Hampshire, and we would like to keep it that way. You know, overabundant deer, they can have negative impacts on tree regeneration, the shrub layer in the forest, and that can have cascading impacts on insects and native bird species. And high deer densities can also negatively impact our moose through the transmission of brainworm. And then lastly, the human population and development has increased since our last management plan in New Hampshire. And so it creates greater potential to have more conflicts with deer, as well as greater suburbanization in the state can make it harder to manage our deer population through hunting. And so it just doesn't make sense to keep, you know, raising that bar higher and higher. And another thing to keep in mind is that if we keep our objectives where they are now, it does allow for some ample opportunity for either sex harvest. You know, if we put our objectives way above where our populations are, then we have to, you know, dial back our either sex harvest to try to keep reaching those goals. And so that's why I'm not proposing to just, you know, increase those levels in most of our units. Okay, so what strategies do we use to try to reach our goal of achieving these population objectives in each of these units? So we adjust the harvest of antlerless deer, and by proxy, our does. And so the primary way that we do that in New Hampshire is through adjusting the number of any deer or either sex days, mostly during the muzzleloader and firearm season. And we can also issue special antlerless tags. And so we're doing that currently in units L and M. As needed, we may have to expand that further in future years if we're not able to get our populations down to those objectives just through the adjusting of either sex days. And so we'll continue to evaluate and readjust these approaches as needed based on how the harvest is impacting the population. Okay, moving on to goal 2. So we want to evaluate the current methods used to monitor and set objectives for the deer population in New Hampshire. So like I said, we're currently using adult buck kill as an index, and that has worked fairly well in the past. But adult buck kill, it doesn't take into account differences in effort. So if our hunter numbers are changing wildly over the years, or if we have a decreasing trend, which has happened during some periods of time, or if hunter effort shifts from one unit to another unit, that can change our harvest in that unit, but it won't necessarily reflect changes in the population, right? So we want to look into what are some other ways that we might be able to do this in the future. What are some other indices? So look into what other states are using. We also want to compare our adult buck kill to trends in the harvest per effort data, so sort of maybe deer killed per trip. So we do have some effort data that we collect through our deer hunter survey. It's sort of incomplete in that it's only muzzleloader in the first 12 days of firearms. But we want to look at these trends in each of these units and see if our adult buck kill is really serving as an adequate index. Then we also do have a population model that estimates deer densities in each of our units. This model was developed a few decades ago, I think in the 90s, and so we do have a biometrician on staff now, and so working with her, we hope to see if we might need to update this model. Okay. Goal 3. Manage deer populations at levels within the carrying capacity of suitable habitat without supplemental feeding programs while maintaining biodiversity. So we're going to continue to educate the public on impacts and concerns about supplemental feeding. So we do that currently through pamphlets, social media posts, press releases, that sort of thing. And again, I've mentioned a few times, but we are interested in learning more about how deer are impacting habitat across the state. We currently don't have, statewide data that we can look at to say, maybe we have too many deer here and they're having a negative impact versus in another area. It's pretty tough because obviously that would be pretty labor intensive, but we're interested in trying to maybe measure that in some way. We want to continue to collect health metrics on deer. So currently during the first 2 days of muzzleloader and the first 3 days of firearms, we have our biocheck days where hunters have to bring their deer in person to a check station. And we have our biologists out at about 20 different check stations around the state. We can collect data on age structure of the population, weight, antler beam diameter. And so that's a data set that dates back to the 1980s. So we want to continue to do that so we can use that data to inform management. Okay. Goal 4, work in partnership with state, federal, and municipal partners to address ecological and social impacts associated with globally overabundant deer populations. So we'll continue to address agricultural damage through the use of pre-damage and depredation permits, working with our damage biologist. We'll also continue to use the Deer Management Assistance Program, or DMAP program. So that's a program that municipalities that are having issues with locally overabundant deer can apply to, and then we can issue them additional antlerless only permits. Okay, goal 5. Monitor deer for diseases of management concern, minimize potential for disease spread, and adjust hunting seasons as needed. So the biggest disease of deer management concern is chronic wasting disease. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. It's It's a neurological disease. It's always fatal in deer. And it's in, I believe, 36 states around the country now. It has not been detected yet in New Hampshire or any New England state. And we do monitor for this disease every year. So we collect deer heads from harvested deer at butchers every year, and we extract lymph nodes out of those heads and we send them to the lab for testing. So we want to continue to do that and also look at ways to expand that surveillance, so maybe getting some taxidermists involved. And we also want to make sure we're monitoring new testing technologies as they become available. There's a lot of research out there looking into CWD testing and how it can become more sensitive and more efficient. And so, as appropriate, we may incorporate those new testing technologies as well. We also need to develop a CWD response plan. It's something that we've sort of drafted over the years, but we've never finalized. And so we want to work with other divisions in the department, as well as other state and federal partners to get this plan written and finalized. And then, besides CWD, there are some other major diseases of concern. They're called hemorrhagic diseases. There's two of them in particular. There's the epizootic hemorrhagic disease and blue tongue disease. And these diseases were historically endemic in the southeast, but they have spread over the years and have now started to reach into the northeast, and they can cause die-offs of deer in areas where deer don't have a lot of resistance to them. And so we did first detect hemorrhagic disease in New Hampshire in 2022, but we haven't had any major outbreaks yet. But this is something we need to continue to keep an eye on. Okay, goal 6, final goal. Conserve and improve a regionally adequate number of functioning deer wintering areas to sustain your population objectives. So we'll continue to predict and promote deer wintering areas, update our inventory and map that we have through annual surveys that our biologists do during the winter. We'll continue to collaborate with our habitat biologist up north, who provides technical assistance to large landowners on how they can manage deer wintering areas on their properties. And we'll also monitor the New Hampshire Division of Forest and Lands Forest Health Program. So they track pests and pathogens that threaten softwood species that might be relevant to deer wintering areas, like the hemlock woolly adelgid or spruce bloodworm. And that's all I have.
So before we switch over, you can see why we didn't do all 20 wildlife areas. We'll be here all night. Before Becky we switch over to deer, if anyone did have interest in seeing the objective for a specific unit, we do pull that up.
G1.
So yeah, we're not proposing any changes to the objective in G1. As you probably know, it's above objective, and it has been for a while now, so we're still managing to try to decrease that population.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else?
A.
A, sure. So we're not proposing to change the objective in A either. I will say, we're not proposing to change the objective in any of the other units. The only one was H2, but A is currently at objective, so we'll be looking to sort of stabilize it there. Anyone else? Okay.
It looks great.
All right, so I will get us through chapter 4, which is related to black bear.
So we'll go over the goals for Black Bear as well as the strategies on how we're going to achieve those goals. So we'll start with goal 1, which is to regionally manage black bear populations using the best available science while balancing social, economic, and ecological factors. Bear managed by region in New Hampshire. We have 6 bear management regions: North Region, White Mountains, Central, Southwest 1, Southwest 2, and the Southeast region. In this figure that you can see, this map that's on the right shows bear habitat availability in each region. The lighter shaded areas, which may be a little tougher to see, are habitat blocks of 2.5 to 20 square miles versus the darker shaded areas are larger blocks in excess of 20 square miles. So from this, you can see that the White Mountains and North region have the greatest availability of bear habitat in our state versus the Southeast region has the least. So here's a graph showing habitat broken out into 6 bear management regions over time. So this first dark shaded bar is bear habitat. That's in excess of 2.5 square miles from 2001 data. The blue is from 2011, and the orange from the most recent data from 2021. And you can see the trend over time in all regions is a gradual decline. But in all of our bear management regions, except for the Southeast, we're still looking at greater than 75% of those regions, or 75% of total bear habitat in those regions. So we'll get into some of those survey questions, like Becky did and Andy earlier. So this question that was asked is, do you think the black bear population in your county should be larger, smaller, or is about right as it is now? Again, that was based on the 2,900 responses from the New Hampshire public, done through the UNA Survey Center. And you can see that, yes, 42% of people that were asked the question either did not know, or were not sure, or did not have an opinion on this. But of the people who did respond, 42% indicated that they feel that the bear population in their county is right where it is now. 9% said they want to see more bear, slightly more, or a lot more, versus slightly less or a lot less bear. And the reasons for that were, the 9% of people that wanted more bear, the main reason was because they don't see enough bear. And the people who wanted to see less bear are the ones that have had conflicts with bear, is the overwhelming reason. So next we'll move on to the same question, but asked to our license holders. And similar trend that you saw with deer, a greater number of people had an opinion on where their bear population should be. So 52% of people felt that, license holders felt that the bear population was right in their county as it is right now. And their reasoning for wanting slightly more bear or slightly less were similar. Not seeing enough bear or a conflict. This next question is, how would you rate New Hampshire Fish and Game's black bear management program performance in your county? And I show this to you because this is something that I feel needs improvement on. A lot of people seemingly do not know a lot about black bear management, especially our non-consumptive or public survey. But of those that did have an opinion, 17% said they felt that we were doing a good job, and 41% of license holders responded that way. So we'll go through the 6 bear management regions now, and similar to what Becky did, I'll just go over this graph that we're looking at real quick. So this blue line is the bear density over time, and this is for the North region. We'll start in the north. The red line, the solid red line, is the objective. The interrupted red line is that 12.5% buffer. So currently for the North region, the objective is 0.6 bears per square mile. We've been at that level within objective for 4 out of the past 5 years and 6 out of the last 10. So we are not proposing any change at this time. The current density is 0.67 bears per square mile, so we are looking to reduce that by about 10%. And that is through hunter harvest primarily. So we're setting our season structures in a way to achieve that. White Mountains region, current objective is 0.8 bears per square mile. Current density is 1.24 bears per square mile, so we are well above objective. We have been trying to liberalize hunting season structures in the past. In 2024, we initiated an additional bear tag that can be used in the White Mountains region. That was very popular among hunters last year, where 1,200 people purchased that additional tag. 46 hunters harvested 2 bears, so 46 additional bear were harvested under that permit. So, populations are starting to trend in the right direction in the whites. So we are not looking to change that objective right now. Historically, it has hovered right around there. So again, our management action is to decrease that population by about 45%. Central region, again, the objective for this region is 0.5 bears per square mile. We're currently sitting at 0.48, well within objective. Historically, we were running well above, and with our current hunting season structure, we've been able to bring that population back down where we want it. We are not proposing any changes to that objective. Southwest 1 region, the objective right now is 0.5 bears per square mile. We're currently sitting at 0.44 bears per square mile. We're actually just fallen out of objective, just barely. So our management action is to increase that population by 14%. We're not looking to change that objective right now. The population is really mirrored that objective very well over time. It's clear that's what the population is. Southwest 2 region, the objective is currently set at 0.5 bears per square mile. We're currently sitting at 0.6. And we're looking to liberalize our hunting season structure slightly in that region in order to bring that population back into objective. So currently we're looking to decrease it by 17%, but there's no change to the objective. Now the Southeast region. This is a region that, as you saw from that first map that I showed, has the least available bear habitat in the state. The habitat that is there is highly fragmented, and we also have the highest human density in our Southeast region. For that reason, during the last big game management process, the objective was brought significantly down. And that's to avoid bear conflicts, and it's just an area where, again, we don't have a lot of habitat. Now, we are well above objective here, because the objective is 0.05 bears per square mile. We're currently sitting at 0.15. However, hunter harvest does not greatly influence this population. If we look at Central region last year, there were 344 bears harvested in the Central region. There were 15 harvested in the Southeast. So we have these regions around the Southeast that have higher bear densities, offer better hunting opportunity. So we don't see hunter harvest really influencing that population the way it does in other regions. But for that reason, we still want to have a smaller bear population in the Southeast region. We are not proposing any changes to that objective. So some of the strategies for Goal 1 are to achieve objectives by adjusting our harvest opportunity, which we've been doing certainly on our 2-year, our biannual season setting time frame. So season length and timing, adjusting bag limits, looking at additional harvest opportunities, adjusting rules and regulations that influence the success rate on bear hunting, evaluate methods to estimate bear density. So currently we are using a population reconstruction model, which all bear mortalities, all known bear mortalities, we're collecting a premolar to. So that's hunter harvested bear, road kills, incidental take, or conflict killed bears. All of those premolars are sent out to the lab. We then get age and reproductive history off of that. That is put into that model by our biometrician and gives us a statewide population estimate. From the deer hunter survey, from the bear observation rates that we get from that, we're then able to partition that statewide population into regions. Also allowing population densities to guide harvest season structure. So our second goal is that New Hampshire Fish and Game will support public education efforts specific to human-bear conflict abatement so that residents and visitors are more informed, proactive, and better understand their role in preventing conflicts. And these are some examples of some of the educational materials that we have created recently. Our bear conflict brochure, which I believe was created in 2019, has been revised since then. Partnered with BearWise, which allows us, that's most jurisdictions across the country, partner with BearWise so that we can have consistent messaging about how to prevent specific bear conflicts. So some of the strategies in order to achieve this are to continue messaging and communications with the public. You know, this is through input sessions like we're doing now, also speaking to user groups like poultry producers, beekeeping organizations, Facebook posts, getting information out, and talking with the media about conflicts and ways to mitigate them. Increasing public awareness and responsibility related to bear conflicts around the state, providing technical assistance related to conflict abatement. So we have a very robust conflict mitigation program in New Hampshire. We pool resources with our federal partner in USDA Wildlife Services. Allows us not only to pool staff resources, but also monetary resources in order to purchase conflict abatement material that we can loan out to the public when they are dealing with bear conflicts. Engage constituents, promote coexistence. Again, partner with our state, local, and private sector for conflict abatement education. Continue to expand on that BearWise partnership that I touched on. That's everything for goal 2. So goal 3 is to minimize the frequency and severity of bear conflicts and promote abatement methods that provide long-lasting resolution to perennial issues. This is an example of one of those brochures that we've created in response to rising conflicts with backyard poultry around the state. So we have a bear human conflict protocol the department has created over time and adjusted. So we want to allow that to guide our response. That will dictate how we will deal with situations as they arise. Promote laws and rules that encourage the proper storage of common anthropogenic attractants such as garbage, bird seed and bird feeders, as well as backyard poultry and livestock. Those 3 make up over 70% of annual conflicts. Work with our agricultural interests to promote conflict abatement. So UNH Extension is a big one there, Department of Agriculture, again, USDA Wildlife Services. Try to minimize annual complaints and recognize that there is a growing human population in the state of New Hampshire. Work with our stakeholders and constituent groups on ways to mitigate these conflicts as they occur. And we also employ 2 seasonal bear technicians annually. They serve as first responders when these conflicts arise. Call comes into the department, they can immediately get out to whatever residence that issue is occurring, do a site visit, assess, and roll out some of that conflict abatement material in order to keep that conflict from continuing. So, more management strategies are to train our department staff annually on best management practices for mitigating bear conflicts as they arise, and to track annual bear-human conflicts through our dedicated database to show conflict trends over time. And I don't think anybody can really see this graph, but essentially we've had an expanding human population in the state, over 130,000 residents over the past 30 years. And our bear population is more than doubled. You'd expect this graph to just be a continuous growth chart. But really, we've capped conflicts at around 450 per year. There is fluctuation in that based on natural food availability on any given year. But I think this really indicates that we are doing because we have such an intense mitigation program, we've done a good job of keeping these conflicts low. That's all I have for dairy management.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Henry Jones. I'm the project leader. And thank you all for coming and your attention here. First, we're going to have a little bit of background on moose. So, current estimate is about 3,000 moose statewide. Approximately 2/3 are in the core range, which is from the White Mountains north. That's primarily based on habitat considerations. Forest type and distribution is more suitable to moose in that part of the state than the southern part, which is more peripheral range. The figure here at right, so this is moose distribution and density across North America. So the green areas are areas of low moose density populations, low number of moose per unit area, and the yellow, orange, red, those are high moose density populations. This is taken from density estimates in 2010, so it is a bit dated at this time, but I will say the information for New Hampshire is still applies. So my takeaways from this figure are that many moose populations are low density, and moose generally are a low density species. And northern New Hampshire still has moderate to high moose density in comparison to other jurisdictions in North America. Moose abundance in New Hampshire. So this graph, early on it uses observations from Fish and Game staff, and then the blue line there is a density estimate based on the Deer Hunter Survey, which is the number of moose deer hunters are seen, corrected to a moose density that's thought to more realistically match the actual density, but not exactly. It's an index designed to track change. From that graph, you can see that abundant moose in New Hampshire is a relatively recent story. It's a 50-year story. We're still figuring out what is normal for New Hampshire. Since 2000, the population's been declining substantially. The cause of decline varies throughout the state. So in northernmost New Hampshire, harvest of less than or equal to 10% of the population annually. And for below objective populations, permit issuance will be suspended. Populations are considered at goal when they are within 25% of that lower level. And the reason we're doing that is because that 25% is about the accuracy of the Deer Hunter Survey. And we want to limit a lot of on and off hunting seasons for regions that are in that area, just to have some consistency. Moose hunting season will be proposed biannually. Strategy 2.4, provide an archery season for moose in select regions. So in the Connecticut Lakes region and in the North region, we would have an archery season for moose from October 1st to October 7th. It would use 25% of either sex permits respective to each region, and crossbows would be allowed. More management strategies. Issue the permits via the lottery, so we're not going to change the lottery system or the bonus point system. Conduct an annual webinar for moose hunters, provides information on moose status and moose hunting methods. Thank you for your attention.
Good evening, Dan Ellingwood. I'll be talking you through Chapter 6 here, Management Plan for Wild Turkey. So to start with some of these graphics that are likely becoming familiar here, the results of the public survey as it relates to public opinion on wild turkey in the state. Looking, pretty consistent between public and license holders here, as you would expect. There's some more familiarity with the wild turkey management program from license holders, but general opinion of performance is generally positive across the board. Similar to other species, we do see a high rate of not sure or don't know on both sides of the equation, but from the public particularly. And in response to that, I'd reference back to Chapter 2, where we're looking to increase our outreach and education to inform more of the people that we're representing here and managing for, to help them improve their understanding of those programs. Next question, do you think wild turkey population in your county should be larger, smaller, or about the same? We're looking at license holders first here, and broad consensus that we're sitting at about right. About 16% would like to see more, 18% license holders would like to see less. And across all counties, variation was within about 5% of this statewide. A couple exceptions. In Stratford County, we saw the highest difference from the average here with 20% seeing more turkeys on landscape. And Grafton County license holders expressed 25% expressed interest in fewer birds. Trends are similar looking at the public survey here, with approximately 50% of the population thinking the turkey abundance sits at about right. Some of the outliers here, Carroll County residents are more likely to want more turkeys, and Belknap residents are more likely to want fewer turkeys. But again, we're still within about 10% of the statewide averages. So looking at Goal 1, we're interested in continuing to regionally manage wild turkey populations using best available science while balancing social, economic, and ecological factors with environmental realities. And so what that means for turkeys essentially is statewide maintenance of where the turkey population stands now, primary objective being population stability. You can see on the graph on the right is depicting annual total harvest, spring and fall. And you can see in the last decade or so, we have reached approximate stability, and that's where we'd like to stay. This bump here is reflecting the addition of the allowance for harvest of second gobblers in select units. So you can see a bump there, but if you were to remove those and only consider first birds that were harvested in each of those units, you're looking at a pretty flat line, a consistent trend there in approximately the last decade. Along with that interest in maintaining population stability, our primary interest is in prioritizing the quality of the spring season while doing so. As you can see, orange depicting harvest that occurs during the spring season. Spring is generally accepted as the premier season for hunting wild turkey. We see the most public interest in doing so, and we're also allowed to provide the most opportunity without risking negative impacts on the growth potential of the population. Harvest of either sex birds in the fall at rates much more than 10 to 15% is known to lead to reduced quality of the spring season and negatively impact the growth potential of the population. So I'm not going to go through management unit by management unit to demonstrate what exactly that looks like, just because across the board our recommendations are to stay the same with previous recommendations. Each of these metrics here represents spring harvest per square mile, or kill per square mile. These objectives were set in 2006 to 2015. We're looking at where 2024 kill per square mile per management unit was, and averages. And almost across the board, looking at the 5-year average, we're at or approaching the previously set management objectives. So we aren't interested in making any changes from that. Just to highlight a couple regions where changes are being proposed, D2, E, and G, we're proposing reducing the objectives in those zones. At the time that those objectives were set, the population was still growing and hadn't yet realized what stability looked like. And since then, we haven't seen relative abundance rates reach what had been previously set. So adjusting those objectives is simply a realization of what is reasonable to expect those populations to sit at based on both hunter participation in those zones as well as habitat availability and environmental conditions that may be preventing additional growth. I should note that these objectives aren't actually guiding management decisions, unlike the other species. These objectives are simply a benchmark that to demonstrate what population stability looks like going forward. When it comes to turkeys, our hunting impact, our objectives is to minimize hunting impact across the board on population growth potential. We're not at a point in any part of the state where we're getting negative feedback about overabundant turkey populations, so we aren't anywhere where we're looking to drive down populations. And our most conservative hunting strategies that are implemented in relatively low abundance management units, we're confident that those strategies are not having any impact on growth potential. So if a population sits, for example, in the White Mountains at a very low rate, that isn't because of our management decisions, that's simply environmental limitations on the turkey population's capacity to continue to grow. So getting into strategies for that goal of maintaining population stability. These strategies are consistent with strategies that were utilized previously. In our lowest relative abundance zones, a conservative approach, including the harvest of one spring bird and the allowance for a conservative fall season, will be maintained. And then we'll use a tiered approach to allow additional hunting opportunity in zones with moderate and more abundant turkey populations, respectively. Again, we're using spring kill per square mile to gauge what those relative abundances are on a management unit by unit basis, and we have established thresholds that will facilitate when additional opportunity can be allowed without negatively impacting the population. So here, moderate opportunity will be allowed within management units where kill per square mile exceeds 0.5, with some additional fall shotgun opportunity, and more liberal opportunity will be provided at kill per square mile, spring kill per square mile thresholds of 0.75. This strategy is going to stay in effect for the next 2 years because we're in the midst of formalizing our biennial rules proposal for the next 2 years. As we continue to move forward with this next 10-year phase of management, we are looking to make some adjustments that I'll get to in the next slides that may have impacts on how these thresholds are interpreted and relate to management or harvest opportunity. So the first strategy I'd like to point at here is I mentioned that we're using kill per square mile as the index to reflect relative abundance. It's worked reasonably well to monitor long-term trends in population change, and we have a couple of other indices that correlate closely with this, demonstrating that it is a reasonable measure of relative abundance. However, it is imperfect. So we're looking over the next 10 years to continue to refine and inform this index such that we can relate that index back to a true abundance on the landscape on a management unit basis. So one example of that is how kill per square mile relates to harvest rates on a management unit by management unit basis. The assumption is that harvest rates are consistent across statewide. We know in reality that's likely not the case because of distribution of hunters. So if we can get a better regional sense of what harvest rates look like, that'll allow us to translate the kill per square mile more appropriately to reflect what the true abundance of turkeys is regionally. So we're looking at implementing a multi-year banding project, banding gobblers in the winter, and then the harvested birds that are banded will be reported in the spring to give us a better idea regionally of what the proportion of the male population is that's actually being harvested during the spring season, from which you could then infer more accurately what the regional abundance is. Another adjustment to the kill per square mile index that we're looking at is updating so the index is kill per square mile of available turkey habitat. Of course, available turkey habitat changes over time due to forest changes as well as development, and we've also improved our technologies and our ability to actually measure that habitat more accurately than, for example, 20 years ago. So we'll be updating those kill per square mile indices with consideration for more updated habitat availability information. The last adjustment that we were interested in making with that kill per square mile index is standardizing it across management units because, of course, during the spring season, there are some units where 2 birds can be harvested and some units where only 1 bird can be harvested. So standardizing the kill per square mile index by only considering the first bird that's harvested in those zones where 2 birds are allowed to be harvested will allow for a better comparison of relative abundance pre-spring season between the management units. And just slightly unrelated, but we are not proposing any change to the total annual ban. Along with that, this is sort of it's a very draft sort of theoretical proposal, but there has been some interest out of the North Country in expanding shotgun opportunity. So we're thinking about how that could be done in the event, based on public feedback, if there's interest in doing so, how it could be done without compromising population growth potential. So this is a draft plan. It would likely be implemented down the road if we find support for it. But we'd be looking at a more focused fall season with more shotgun opportunity. Right now, 50 or more % probably of annual harvest is coming out of opportunistic harvest. Annual fall harvest is coming opportunistically by archery deer hunters. So the strategy here would be to redirect it, maintain the same total harvest, but redirect it towards shotgun opportunity to the extent that interest exists in the general public. And of course, we don't know exactly how this would play out, so we would need to maintain some flexibility to adjust the length of fall shotgun season if we see those harvest exceed rates that would compromise the quality of the spring season as well as the population growth potential. So I just these are just a couple random examples of management units and what those management strategies how those management strategies would be applied. I've got 3 examples. I do have slides for the other management units if there's interest in me pulling it up. So here's C2. This is your kill per square mile right here. Down on the bottom, red line is the objective 2016 to 25 as well as 2026 to 35, and that's just reflecting what population stability looks like approximately in that unit. And then here, those kill per square mile thresholds that are applicable statewide, above which would facilitate additional fall opportunity as well as a change in mag limit in the spring. So here, there would be no additional opportunity. This would be conservative fall harvest and one bird spring season. Here's an example where you're above 0.75 square mile, harvest per square mile. So here, that would facilitate the harvest allowance for 2 spring birds, as well as fall shotgun opportunity. You can see sort of this shaded line up here. That's showing the difference in square mile based on 1 bird versus 2 bird harvest. So in H1, you are allowed to harvest 2 spring birds. So this blue line here is correcting for that, that impact on the kill per square mile index. So for comparative purposes and for management purposes going forward, we would consider the first bird harvest in that zone rather than the 2 bird harvest, just because of the risk that if you are considering that 2 bird harvest, you could be overrepresenting what the actual abundance is in that zone. And here's the last example here. Again, no proposed change. I1 falling between those 2 established thresholds that would facilitate a fall shotgun season currently, but will exclude the opportunity for harvest of a second bird. Last goal here is just to continue to annually monitor the population distribution, abundance, reproductive success, population change, and general health through indices beyond that kill per square mile index that we use to guide management decisions. Surveys to get at this include our annual summer brood survey that cues us into nesting success rates that previous spring, as well as our winter flock survey that provides some long-term trend data on population studies. Those surveys both include opportunities for disease monitoring through public reporting. Let's see. Yeah, so passive reporting on disease monitoring, and through that banding program that I discussed previously, there would also be some opportunity for more active surveillance of for disease monitoring. And that concludes service.
All right, thanks everybody for hanging in there. It's a long presentation. You were our test audience too, so. So just as I was watching that, I was just kind of thinking, so this is our 4th plan that spans roughly 40 years of management of these species. If you saw in several of those graphs, just the drastic change that's happened in that 40 years, which is, spans virtually everyone in this room's, lifespan. Most of these, well, really all of these species, deer, bear, moose, and turkey, 40 years ago were at much lower levels than any of them are right now. For example, 1983, the total statewide deer harvest was 3,000 deer. We average about 11,000 deer now. There's been a lot of change in the state, in habitat and weather patterns. The other thing with moose in particular, we've been doing moose research going on 30 years now. New Hampshire has really led the country in moose research, and we've had nonstop moose research going on for at least 25 years now. So there's been a lot of change in the populations, there's been a lot of change on the landscape, and there's been a lot of change in the department's knowledge of what impacts these species. So, I feel good about where we are right now, but the important thing about tonight is to get everybody else's input. This will work a little bit different than the public hearings that we had. This is an input session, so we're not gonna start with the 3-minute thing. I'll have people come up to the podium, say your name and the town that you're from, and you can make your comments. Just be respectful that there are other people in the room. It's a relatively small audience, so I don't think we'll have an issue getting through everybody. If someone is going on for a relatively long time, I'll just ask that you kind of wrap up and then let someone else have a chance. And if you want afterwards, you can come back up and finish those thoughts. With that, who would like to go first? Come on up.
Hi, Dan Williams, live in Concord. First of all, a thank you to all of you guys, the commission, all the project managers for all the work you do. It's a ton of work you guys do for this, and I really appreciate it. And I'd also like to thank, because I wasn't at the meeting last week, thank you guys for considering to open up crossbows men's meetings. Regarding turkeys, I live in Concord. The turkey population, when I moved here in 2006, it was nothing to see double-digit flocks of birds around our development in East Concord. And over the past 3 years or so, the most adult turkeys I've seen at one time has been 3 birds. And I spend a lot of time in the woods, both during, summer, hunting season, winter. Their sign is drastically decreased. I don't think this winter I saw any turkey tracks except for in a couple locations, and it was like maybe 1 or 2 birds. And I know that some of that population change in the Concord area has been caused by low mass production in about 3 years in a row prior to this past year, where we finally had some more acorns. I know there's, caterpillar damage of oak trees and beech trees around here has been pretty bad the last 3 years in a row. And there's some stands that City of Concord's gonna cut dead oak trees out of because they've just been hit multiple years. So I obviously, food availability in the fall might have hit that some. But I think you guys should take the model that you've now seemed to do with moose and kind of micromanage things more, break up those larger central and southern regions into east and west for moose. I think there's a lot of variability in turkey numbers locally that is or is not maybe being shown in group surveys, or I also am a little nervous about the facts of how unintentional or intentional feeding in the spring might change the location and like flock densities of turkeys in the spring. But it's been really strange to see like a real drop in turkey numbers. And that brings me to my second point, which is an animal that wasn't mentioned, but it has been mentioned a lot in the comments that have been online. I took part 10 years ago, I think it was, in the bobcat trail camera study.
So does this relate to any of these species?
I think the other part of the decline in the turkey population is because of an increase in bobcats.
Okay.
And I think that's also negatively impacting other small game species and even other predator species like fisher. And I know that 10 years ago when it was proposed, there was a big deal, there was a lot of input, and I know that was a long time in coming because you did the trail camera survey, because I participated in it. I've got my sense from right up here. I put my camera in designated areas. I can't put a trail camera out without seeing bobcats. Bobcats are all over the place. Every time I go into any suitable snowshoe hare habitat, which is pretty scarce around here, bobcat tracks. And I just think that it's a different environment now than it was 10 years ago when you proposed a season and then you walked it back when you got some pushback.
So that is very separate
I
from
know.
this, so we're gonna try and keep to
All right.
deer, bear, moose, and turkey.
All right.
Okay.
That.
Thank you. Did you want to leave? You said
Yes.
before, so I'll
Yeah.
leave that with
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Who else would like to make a comment?
Yeah.
It's a carnival.
And, again, as it relates to turkeys,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear that, but,
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
seasons and things, this is very specific to deer, bear, moose, and turkey. Anybody else? Come on up.
Thank you for taking my comment again. I was here last week, so. Just have a question.
Just name and town.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Ross Johnson, Samberton, New Hampshire, Belknap County. We love to do questions, I just, after the
Yeah, we can
presentation,
do some
so.
questions.
Just a question built in, obviously we've had a bunch of mild winters, so kind of keying in on the deer population portion. If we were to see, I just go back to like the winters of 2009, 2010. If we saw something that, disproportionately took out a lot of deer numbers, is that built into the plan, or is there contingencies built into, numbers? I know they're way high now, but obviously Mother Nature can take a swing at it too, so.
So it's not necessarily built, I mean, to some extent, all those mortality factors are built into the objectives and where we think a population can be maintained. Where winter severity is built into how we adjust either sex days. So we will adjust either sex opportunity depending on winter mortality. For the first several years that I was here and well before that, every time we would do season setting, all of our either sex days, there would be a disclaimer, dependent on winter severity. We haven't done that in a while because we haven't had a winter severity.
Yeah, it's been trending obviously.
But we still, whether or not we mention that on the season setting, we still account for that. So if we were to have a severe winter and we felt we've lost a lot of deer, we would adjust those either sex days to compensate for that.
Question two, if I have time. Obviously, there was a lot of talk in the presentation, which was great, keen in on, I think it's great that you guys are really keen in on CWD and things like EHD and things like that for the herd. My question revolves around, we're talking about trying to promote awareness for the public on feeding deer through the wintertime in hard months, and obviously talking about like microbiomes and things we've seen die off. And I think that also is linked to CWD, where we have congregations of deer sharing the same food source. It just seems contradictory to me with the, I know I spoke out against baiting last week, and the proponent of kind of having some baiting bans maybe looked at, how does that differentiate? For me, it's a hard line, for the state, we're gonna tell the public, like, don't feed them during the wintertime when they're in the hard way, but, as hunters, we're allowed to put out synthetic food and grain, crack corn or whatever. So I guess my comment is a question of nature, but just, is the state seeing a difference in how they're looking at the two?
So, yeah, so I mean, that does relate kind of back to the objective about disease issues and chronic wasting disease. That is something we're keenly aware of and concerned about as well. There's a long history of kind of where baiting and feeding and why the rules and regulations are.
Right, and I know it has to do with some of the microbiomes and stuff in the wintertime.
But yes, that's certainly a concern for disease transmission. That will probably, outside of some of this other stuff, that will probably be part of that CWD response plan that Becky had referenced. And, despite issues we've had in the past with trying to limit some of those things, a disease outbreak of CWD should be a trend.
I'm a guy, big, like I said last time, I do most of my hunting in the backyard, I do a lot of tracking and things, and I have a place in northern Maine too, so it's unique to see, and just being able to see from the time, this is obviously a fairly new law or premise that we've had with baiting, for us to go through time and then for me to even see the shift really in some of the deer patterns in some of our areas that are, becoming a little more urbanized, but deer starting to migrate towards these bait, piles are.
So that's a little bit more out, that's getting a little more specific.
Yeah, no, I get you.
But
I'm just thinking of the congregation too,
absolutely.
Yeah.
What I would say is, you can reach out to Becky or myself after, and we are happy to talk to you about kind of the history and concerns. That does relate to relate certainly to our disease section of the deer plan. And again, there's a long history of kind of why regulations are the way they are in New Hampshire. We are happy to go over that with you after.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys, appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, come on up.
Hi, I'm Rob Ricketson. I'm from Georges Mills, New Hampshire. One of the things that I noticed with the bear was you were talking about making laws to make human-bear conflicts less. One of the things I think that really needs to be pushed, and it goes on turkeys as well as bear, is stopping on Aunt Judy from feeding the turkeys and the bear into the spring. It affects the turkey hunters because they stockpile the turkeys, eliminating numbers reduction or, your bag limits. And you're also causing bears to come in and feed later in the season. If we could cut it off like on April 1st, that way the turkeys just dispatch themselves out back into the wild to feed on wild food instead of Aunt Judy's black oil sunflower seeds. That way it's also eliminating the bears coming in, tearing apart her bird feeder and her calling one of the COs to come and deal with this great big bear that's on her front porch eating the seeds. That, whether or not she was stockpiling the turkeys, because I don't think Aunt Judy's going out there to shoot the turkey, but that's been known to happen too, and it's legal because you're feeding the birds, and people will do it to keep you from being able to hunt the turkeys, and then you cause human-to-human conflict because you have hunters all around the property calling, driving the landowner crazy. So I just think it also will help the turkeys get back to their natural feed and to their natural breeding without worrying about being on somebody's lawn where everybody in town can see it. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Very well. Somebody else, yeah, you should leave Judy's number with our law enforcement. Especially if she's feeding bears.
Yeah. I got
All right,
walkers.
Judy.
Anybody else? We didn't talk you to sleep, did we?
No, I'd just like to say something, that I was down here about the bobcats mainly in this. New Hampshire.
Come on, yep.
I'm not a very good speaker.
Nope, that's all right.
But,
Just name your town you're from.
I'm Joan Verratti and I'm from Claremont, New Hampshire. And, reason I'm really here is because we lost all our peacocks because of bobcat. And
So before you get into bobcats, does it relate to the management
it's
goals and
gonna, when it
objectives?
talks about everything else that we hunt,
Okay.
turkeys, for instance. I've lived in Sullivan County all my life. And I've seen where you guys have trapped turkeys around that area for years, and we've had numerous turkeys. Now there ain't as many, nowhere near. Two-bird limit, yeah, that's gonna have a reduction because you're drawing in more hunters from the outside coming in. And the bobcats, they're killing off all the turkeys. The feathers out in the woods, tracks, reduction of rabbits, partridge, everything. So that's why I'm here.
Okay,
Other than that, you're doing a fine job.
great. Thank you very much.
Thank
Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Well, I thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. I appreciate you letting us test out the presentation on y'all. And again, don't forget, if anybody has comments, you can submit those till April 25th through email or mail, or give us a call. Thank you.